Hi everyone, welcome to another Seiya Legend of Justice video. Now in today's video I'll be making a constellation priority tier list to help you guys to understand which characters need their constellation the most. Now it's very important to know that this tier list is purely based on the importance of a character's constellation, not necessarily the strength of the constellations themselves. A simple example, I have for example Moses on the top tier, whereas Iki is below that. It's by no means Moses is better than Iki. We all know Iki Goku's is so much better than Moses. However, if we talk about the importance of his constellation skills, Moses absolutely needs his constellation skills for him to be even used in any type of content, whereas Iki Goku's can be played without any constellation. Obviously, constellation would help him to perform better. However, he's still playable without any resources being invested in his constellation. But that's totally not the case for Moses. And that's kind of why I want to make it very clear. The tier list you're going to see today is purely based on how important are the constellations to those characters, not the character strengths themselves. Now, in terms of tier list, it should be fairly self-explanatory in terms of the different ranks. So at the top, I have basically I first split out by whether you need 2 skills or 1 skills on the constellation. So obviously 2 skill means you have the constellation maxed out and you have both level of the constellation. Whereas 1 skill basically means you only have a third of it unlocked, and therefore you only have unlocked the first skill of that constellation. Obviously, there will be a huge number of characters all falling into one group, so that's kind of why I have then separate out into S rank, A rank, or B rank. For example, to kind of further denote, which characters are even more important out of all of the ones who need, both their constellation skills unlocked, etc. All right, so now starting from the top, I have Poseidon. Poseidon is definitely a constellation skill because you are able to reduce the duration or the cooldown period of your looping skill, and his looping skill is very strong. It is able to remove Cosmo, it's able to stun, so have very good control ability. So you absolutely want his constellation skill to be maxed out. It's one of the strongest skill for Poseidon, in fact. Then we have Shurigoklos. Shurigoklos is only played in order to protect your front row ally, and he's only able to do that when he has his constellation maxed up. So, no brainer why you definitely want him to have his constellation skills. Hyuga Goklos is mainly a PvP character because he's able to remove enemies' passive skills, etc. He's able to obviously also apply those control ability in terms of the freeze, etc. However, if you bear in mind the fact that he's in PvP, a lot of time up against enemy Shongo close who have the ability to dispel debuff, and freeze count as one of the debuff in the game. It's very important for you to actually have Hyuga Goku's constellation skill, because without that constellation skill, he will totally get countered by Shongo. But with constellation skill, Hyuga Goku can actually work against them in PvP. So it's very important why you have his constellation skill maxed out. Then we have Gemini Cannon. Gemini Cannon's constellation skill allow him to confuse everyone who attack him. Normally, the way you do it is you place him in the front row. So you normally place him on the left hand side as well on the front row. So that basically means is that 3 enemies will be attacking into you, and therefore you would be able to confuse 3 of the enemy. That's great for burst team, for example, because then what happens is in the first few seconds, you'll be like 8 characters against just 2 enemies. So that's absolutely great. But just more generally speaking, if you're able to confuse an enemy, normally what that means is that they could be wasting their own looping skill on their allies, or delays when they will be using their looping skill. So that's a huge advantage in PvP as well. So that's kind of why if you are going to play Gemini Cannon, you definitely want both of his constellation skill maxed out. Then we have Neo Aurora and also Virgo Shun. Both of them are very similar. Basically, both of them, their constellation skill allow you to do more damage. Virgo Shun buff up your own team, and then also I think debuff your team, the enemy by a further 5%, I think, with his constellation max out. Whereas Leo allow him to apply some kind of debuff in terms of electricity. Let me just double check. Neo allow you to stack his electricity 3 layers and also 15 seconds. 15 seconds is a really long time, so basically for majority of the battle, you'll be able to stack this completely. And then if we actually took a look at the electricity ability, it's an increased damage by 35%. You times that by 3 stack, that's 105% extra damage, which is absolutely great. So that's kind of why you definitely want to play them. They're mostly used in boss battles, so you do a lot more damage when you actually play them as support unit. But they are also very helpful in this game mode, which happens to be on very handily. But basically in this game mode where you try to beat all those different stages and try to have a race against others in the ranking board to see where you are placed in terms of how fast you meant to clear of the content, and basically you also get reward accordingly. This is a very good event because normally what happens, you try to rank within the top 300, so you get random light and dark chests every single month. And if you actually take a look at the team people use, you will notice that Leora and also Vergashun is pretty much always going to be used, like regardless of the other characters, because the other characters kind of change a lot. But you can see Leora, Vergashun, also Sirius been played a lot as well. Sometimes you also see like Hauna, Styrian, or Shongoku, etc. But basically, you normally see three support units, and Vergashun and Leora are some of the most common ones you see. And that's because if you actually use them, you increase the damage output you're able to do, and therefore you can probably reduce the clearing time per stage by like half a second or maybe a second. If you times that by how many stages, that can normally help you to move really far in the leaderboard. So this is very important. Very good damage in boss battle, but also potentially help you to get an extra life and dark every single month. But that's why they're very high priority, and I have them on the top tier. Then we have Aquarius Hyuga. Aquarius Hyuga basically with his constellation maxed out, he is able to launch his ultimate attack in like just 1 second, which is great. It's also kind of the reason why in this version of the game right now where we have certain restrictions, so we can't use any assassin or assist character, etc. Across Hyuga is one of the main DPS people use. It's kind of what people are able to do in order to have beat the stage in just like a second or so. So basically, you can only do this because across Hyuga has his constellation maxed out, so he can use his ultimate in just after 1 second. So very very impressive from that perspective. May potentially able to. You won't see him being played every single time because of the different restriction, but when he is able to be played, he will be able to help you really rank really high in the leaderboard. But even outside of this game mode, just in freeze teams in general, he's going to be used a lot, and he's going to be very valuable from that perspective. So that's why you want his constellation skill to be maxed out. Then we have Astro Hyuga. The reason why you want Astro Hyuga is mainly for this. Let me just quickly collect this. The reason why you really want Astro Hyuga to be completely maxed out is because of this game mode where you have different labyrinths where you're forced to only play characters of one element. The biggest blocker for this kind of stages is normally going to be either Seiya Goggles or Sagittarius Seiya, etc. Mainly Sagittarius Seiya quite early on because what happens, he's able to kind of do huge amount of damage and just kill everyone straight away. That's going to be really annoying. And basically for the wind faction or element, basically there are only two characters who can counter that. One's going to be Papillon Mule, and the other one's going to be Astro Hyuga. And for Astro Hyuga, in order to do this, you need his constellation to be maxed up. So that's kind of why it's very important there. Then we have Leo Goldclose. Leo Goldclose is mainly used for boss battle. A lot of people pretty much just level up Leo Goku for boss battle. His constellation allows him to do a lot more damage. If you don't even have his constellation, then he is probably not going to be performing as well in boss battle, and you may be better off using Seiya Goku, for example, right? So by the virtue of you planning to use him in boss battle, you really need his constellation to be maxed out. So that's kind of why he's here. The Roshidoko, similar kind of thing. You want his constellation to be maxed out so that he's able to give extra buff. Once again, mainly for boss battle. But even just in generally, if you do not have this constellation maxed out, what Roshidoko can do is just interruption. However, if you actually have this, he now is able to support your team as well through buff. So it almost brings out a whole side of Roshidoku that you're not able to have access to before. So it's also a pretty big power jump to have his constellation skill. Then we have Athena Gokos. Athena Gokos is one of the best character to counter Sagittarius Seiya. Once again, you need his constellation skill in order to do that, so no brainer why you need to max it out. Ayakos is able to remove enemies' passive skill. If you do not have his constellation skill, he can only remove it for the person opposite him. If you do have his constellation skill, when that person is killed off, when that enemy is killed off, you can then transfer that ability to someone else on the enemy team. So that's very good because eventually you can pretty much rotate around all of the enemy team to make sure they all have the one at a time. But eventually, every single one of them would have their passive skill being removed, for example. So that's a huge advantage. Removing passive skill is one of the biggest advantage you can get in this game. So that's why it's huge. Then we have Senators. If you do not have Senators Constellation maxed out, then what happens is when he dies and enter Soul mode, he can only use normal attack. However, if you have Constellation maxed out, he can also use his looping skill and his ultimate skill, etc., which pretty much just make him almost as good as him being on the field permanently, right? So that's kind of why you definitely want that. It's a massive power jump. On top of that, he also life drain when he's in that mode, and obviously he lose HP over time, but he tried to stay alive by the fact that he also life steal enough HP back. So if you're just only trying to life steal through normal attack, it's probably not going to be sufficient. But if you're now also able to life steal through looping attacks and also ultimate attacks, which do a lot more damage, you can actually make it a lot more self-sustainable. So that's kind of why Santos really pretty much needs his constellation skill. Then we have Minos. What Minos does is okay. So basically, Minos has this skill, which basically means that every single time when you use other skills, the enemy basically do get hit by a bit of extra damage. However, this is only when you use other looping skills, well maybe ultimate skill as well, but normally those skills only happen once every like 10 seconds. However, if you actually have his constellation, this get activated every single time when you do normal attack. Normal attack happens like once every 1 or 2 seconds. So immediately you're able to increase damage output by like sixfold, sevenfold. But that's great by itself. But also you're also able to heal back by the same amount of damage as you dealt. And that's great for Minos because Minos is really fragile. Really good character, but really fragile. And this will help his survivability by quite a lot. So it's very important for you to level up his constellation skill for this. Then we have Radamansis, same thing in terms of survivability. Without his constellation skill, he is only able to. Let me check what's the cooldown. He only able to be immune to damage and increase buff every 6 seconds. However, with his constellation skill, you immediately cut off by half, so it's now every 3 seconds. And also the threshold reduced because before it used to be 15% and now it's only 10%. And that's going to be quite important as well because normally when a single damage exceeds 15%, that's really common in PvP, really common in PvE, but a lot more difficult in PvP. Whereas now if you're able to lower the threshold, now that kind of makes Radamansis somewhat playable in PvP as well, so that's kind of why it's quite important there. And then Moses, I briefly touched on this at the start of the video, but basically you only play Moses in order to counter enemy Sagittarius Seiya's opening attack, and Moses is only able to do this when he has his constellation. So once again, no-brainer as to why you need constellation skill on him. Alright, now we move on to the next tier. All of the characters here obviously will still benefit from having 2 constellation skill maxed out. However, just in my opinion, they are normally a bit lower priority than the ones at the top, and I'll try to explain why. So for Seiya Goklos, basically what happens is when you have his constellation skill maxed out, he is now able to life drain and extra hit buff. I think it's extra hit and life drain. Let me check. Yeah, extra hit and life drain. Extra hit pretty much means nothing, but life drain is actually really important for him because eventually what happens is that you would basically without that constellation, what Seiya Goklos have built in for him is only damage reduction and damage immunity. But now not only you have damage immunity, but you also have the ability to life drain, and that increases survivability by quite a lot. The only reason why I don't think it's as high priority as some of the other ones is because some people just use Seiya Gold for boss battle, etc. In which case, life drain doesn't matter at all. And also, obviously, if you have other ways to protect your Seiya Gold, for example, you pair up with Shuri Gold, or use, I don't know, Aris Move, for example, right? Then you don't necessarily need to have life drain on himself. But that's kind of why I don't feel like it's as important in terms of priority as some of the other characters I already talked about. Alright, now next one we have Shungoku. Shungoku is a bit of a funny one. So his constellation basically allow him to get a bit of a shield, allow him to do true damage, and also get a bit of cosmo. Now, in terms of damage, that's pretty much you can ignore that because I mean he's a support unit. He's not meant to be doing damage. In terms of the shield, that is nice to have. Although normally you can just put more defensive cards like Raya Shiki cards, and also he normally already has a pretty good defense capability already with his own passive. But then in terms of the extra Cosmo, you are basically gonna get what an extra 1,000 Cosmo every I don't know 6, 7, 8 seconds. So it's not like a huge amount either. But that's kind of why I think like the power jump from his constellation is not that massive. However, having said that, Shungoku is probably the one character in this game that you'll be using for every single game mode, no matter whether it's boss battle, whether it's PvP, or whether it's PvE. So if you consider from that perspective, it's kind of worth the investment, even though the power jump is not great in my opinion. This is something that you will be using in every single aspect of the game. So from that perspective, I do feel like it's probably still worth the investment to level up himself to 2 skill. But if you're really tight on resources, then he probably won't be as big a priority as some of the other characters up there. Then Ikigoku, I probably already mentioned, he is even playable at 5 star, right? So whether you actually have Ikigoku all the way to the max, and also level up his constellation, that's kind of your own personal preference on how far you want to take Ikigoku. The other thing which can potentially backfire on Ikigoku is that even if Ikigoku dies really quickly, that's not sometimes necessarily a bad thing because then you can actually take away some of the enemy Cosmo as a result when he goes into kind of resurrection mode. So having extra constellation and therefore better stats for him doesn't always means a better result when you're having like a mirror match in PvP. So as a result, once again, it's nice to have, but not the absolute priority for Ikigoku to max out his constellation straight away. Then we have Pandora. Pandora is very important for you to have the first level of constellation, by the way. So that should be an absolute priority, but ideally you want the second level of constellation as well. Basically, Pandora is very fragile, so normally what happens is you definitely want the first level so that you can actually protect yourself. Very, very important. So first level guaranteed, you should level that up as soon as possible. The second level I think is still very useful, but this is more from like a damage perspective because basically what happens is that her ultimate skill can either heal or do damage depending on whether it's targeting your allies or your enemies. Now, normally a lot of time, if your character are on low HP, you'll be targeting your own allies, and therefore Pandora will be more of a healer than damage dealer. However, she does have this ability, Wish of Opposite, which is another form of damage protection and also healing ability for your allies. And if you do have Constellation maxed out, what happens is you will be able to trigger this a lot more often because the cooldown can be removed every single time when you use other skills, etc. And that basically helps you to protect your whole team a lot better. It also makes Pandora a lot more damage dealing because now your own teammate no longer have the lowest HP normally after you already applied this ability on them, and therefore you would then end up hitting the enemy a lot more and therefore actually do real damage as opposed to healing. But that's kind of why I do feel like there's a quite interesting aspect of Pandora, but it kind of depends on whether you want to use Pandora more as a healer or whether you want to use it more as a damage dealer. But that's kind of why I think, first level, absolutely important, but second level, just, not the biggest priority, but still, ideally, you would want to have that effect as well. Alright, next one, we have Sidra Cannon. Sidra Cannon is very similar to Ikigoku in the sense that he is playable at 5 star because he's really strong opening skill. But if you actually take a look at his own ability, what happens is that if you do happen to actually train him up, when he's at maxed out constellation, he's now able to use his opening ability every 10 seconds. And that's absolutely great. Especially if you're facing up against an enemy which only have one looping skill. Looping skill normally get activated once every 10 seconds. You can force the enemy to always use their looping skill on their own team rather than against you, and that can be absolutely huge. But that's kind of why it's pretty nice to have his constellation skill maxed out. Although I also totally understand because he can be playable at 5-star, why you may choose to skip him in order to level up someone else's constellation skill. But that's kind of why I place him one level below. Then we have Libra-Shuru. Libra-Shuru basically, when you max out his constellation, he can get 1 stack of Will of Excalibur when he get hit by a normal attack, and that normally a lot of time can significantly allow you to reach your 15 stacks a lot quicker. He's still going to be playable without his constellation. It's just going to take him a bit longer, but he's still going to be playable. So that's kind of why I feel like, maxing out his constellation skills is nice to have, but it's not absolutely essential. If you have the resources, then go do it. If you don't, then don't worry too much about it. It will just take you a bit longer. Then we have Sagittarius Seiya. Sagittarius Seiya, if you are playing him a lot in PvP mirror match, for example, like if you're on the Japanese server, where the meta is still very much the environment, PvP environment is still very much Sagittarius Seiya, then you can go and invest in him because what happens is that you have a stronger attack buff, you also charge up cost more quicker, therefore you can launch your own ultimate before the enemy Sagittarius Seiya launch their ultimate. So it helps a lot when you are in a mirror match. However, outside the mirror match, it doesn't actually matter that much anymore because in PvE, what this basically means, the difference between, let's say, the first level and second level, probably only going to be like half a second quicker in terms of attack. That's not going to make a huge amount of difference in PvE. And the other occasion where you normally use Sagittarius Seiya a lot is actually to put his own exclusive Arashiki card on him. In which case you can then remove all of the enemy's passive ability, etc. But you do this by his opening attack, not actually by his ultimate, which is buffed out by his constellation. So that's kind of why I just feel like unless you're going to play him in a mirror match against another enemy such as Seiya, otherwise it's probably not that big a priority anymore, at least on the global servers. Next we have Aphrodite. Aphrodite is pretty nice when you have his constellation maxed out. You definitely want it to be at least the first level, because even at the first level, what Aphrodite is able to do is, even at the first level, you have the ability to poison anyone who is attacking you. It's RNG, but you have that ability. Whereas if you have leveled it up, then it can be 100% chance, and also you can apply this debuff onto the enemy. So it does make the poison team a lot stronger, because remember Aphrodite also heal off on any poison damage. So if you're able to do more poison damage and also debuff enemy, you're able to make your Aphrodite survive longer, and poison team is all about Aphrodite surviving. So Aphrodite's constellation definitely does give him a big power jump. However, it's also lower on priority for me because I just don't think Aphrodite has been played much on global servers anymore. Like, Poison Team is never good in PvE, so you would never play Aphrodite in PvE, to be honest. In PvP, the main, like, if you have to pick 5 PvP teams for your cross-server battles, etc., it's normally going to be, one zombie team around Iki Gokos. You're going to have one freeze team, which is around Fever Gokos. You're normally going to have one team around Seiya Gokos. You're going to have another team around Poseidon. And basically that only leaves one PvP team left, where a lot of people choose different things. Some people do a burst team, some people do a poison team, some people do a different variation of a different thing. Maybe one team based on Leo Gokos, for example, right? But that's kind of the way PvP meta is going right now. And you can already see, Poison team doesn't always make a spot into PvP. Now you may be thinking, Poison team can normally beat the burst team, right? So surely, if I have to pick between Aphrodite and some character for the burst team, I would pick Aphrodite. But you also have to realize, Poison team only beats the burst team because of Moses. If you actually take Moses out, Poison team doesn't beat the burst team at all. Like, if you do not have Moses on your team, for example, actually this will be very helpful for the people on the Japanese server, in fact. Right now, in your meta, I believe Poison team still beat the burst team. That's not because of Aphrodite, alright? Don't get that wrong. Poison team beat burst team because of Moses. Because of Moses' constellation skill. If you have to pick a priority between Moses and Aphrodite, you should be going towards Moses, not Aphrodite. If you do not have Moses on your poison team, Aphrodite will be killed straight away by Sagittarius Seiya. No doubt about that. So do not get confused and missync that Poison Team is stronger because of Aphrodite. Yes, the core Poison Team is Aphrodite, but what makes Poison Team work against Burst Team is all about Moses. So once again, if I have to pick between the priority of them, I'll pick Moses over Aphrodite, and that's also why I'm having it on my tier list this way as well. And yeah, for people on the global server, because of that, I honestly don't think, even though Aphrodite's constellation is going to give him a huge power jump, because you have to factor in where would you actually play Aphrodite, and there aren't actually that many places. That's why I also have to, rank Aphrodite down slightly to counter for that fact. All right. Next we have Situational. Situation's constellation skill allow you to buff up your team, which is very good. Sounds very good, especially in boss battle, etc. The only problem is that a lot of time the boss does. So basically, the trigger condition for this constellation is that you have to lose HP yourself, and a lot of the time the boss does not do enough damage so that you lose HP that quickly. That basically means the buff is not as strong as, let's say, a buff from Roshidoku, and that's kind of the main thing. And that's kind of why, even though I can see usage for it sometimes, it's not going to be the biggest priority, and that's why I have it one level down. Then we have a few characters who I think is a bit more situational in terms of whether their constellation skill actually helps or not. But basically, you have Saga Light, whose constellation skill allow him to hide away for 4 seconds. You have Hypnos, whose constellation skill allow him to have a bit of a shield, have a bit of a healing, have a bit of a Cosmo, and then you have Draco, whose constellation skill also help him to survive a bit better, because I think it give him one extra chance of restoring HP and Cosmo to like 5 seconds ago, right? Or basically the ability for those three all help them to survive longer. But that's where it gets very tricky in terms of whether you actually need to survive any longer in the battle, because sometimes you can probably already finish the battle without that extra bit of defensive capability. The easiest example is going to be Saga Light. If I put this into perspective, for example, the main way you play Saga Light is that you want Saga Light to survive on the field for long enough, normally for 14 seconds, so that you are able to activate this Comet Blast, which reduce, or Comet Strike, which reduce all of the enemy HP by half. Alright, this is absolutely great. And basically, the whole game plan is to make him survive for 14 seconds in the battle. If you have his constellation where he's able to hide away in another dimension for 4 seconds, you are able to protect your Saga life for a minimum 8 seconds in the battle, and that helps you a lot. It can almost guarantee that you'll be still alive by the 14 seconds when that meteorite or the comet drops onto the enemies. So that's great. But at the same time, you could also argue if your Saga Lights built all defensively, then maybe you don't actually need the constellation to help him to survive for 14 seconds. But that's kind of why I feel like all those three of these characters, because they are improving their survivability by a lot, there is a bit of a question mark of how often do you actually need that extra bit of survivability, and whether it's actually going to be a better investment to just put more defensive Arashiki cards on them instead. So that's kind of why I'm a bit on the fence on whether I want to max them out in the constellation straight away, or whether they are a bit lower priority than a lot of the other characters here, to be honest. But that's why I have them here. Then the next one I have is Aris Moon. Once again, similar kind of situation. It's somewhat situational, because what Aris Moon is able to do is that Aris Moon can basically, when his HP drop below 30%, he's able to activate Crystal Wall. Whether your team actually needs Crystal Wall at that point is another question. And also it resets the CD, but it also gets into a bit of a situation where your city already kind of close to be finished, and therefore you'll be activating Crystal Wall anyway. So that's kind of the reason why I think it's also somewhat situational and maybe less of a priority to actually level him up. Okay. Then we have the next one, which is Surplus Shun. Surplus Shun basically he has ability which is able to allow you. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let me actually try to find him. Okay. Yeah, so Situational basically have this ability where he will be reducing everyone's crit rate and also crit damage by a significant amount. If you do not have his constellation, he'll be reducing this for both your team and also the enemy team. However, if you do have it, it will only be applied to enemy. So that's basically giving you a massive buff over the enemy. But that's kind of why I feel like it's kind of worth it to have that. But at the same time, the main reason why people play Pope Shion a lot of time is actually for his Crystal War ability rather than the fact of reducing crit rate or crit damage, etc. So if you put that into consideration, then maybe actually it's not so much of a necessity to level up his constellation straight away. So that's kind of why I have him here. Then we move on to the ones on the lowest rank of 2 skills. I'll just talk through the first few briefly, but basically Leo Iki can be played 5-star copy without any constellation, and also the constellation effect is only gonna be working when he has been killed off in the battle, and normally that gets into a bit of a weird situation in terms that if he tends to get killed off quite quickly anyway, then this buff won't be on for long enough. Whereas if the other way, if you build him defensively, then he would be able to survive anyway, and then you wouldn't actually be able to trigger his constellation ability. But that's kind of why it's somewhat weird depending on how you want to build Leo Iki, and that's also why I feel like it's going to be much lower priority compared to other characters. Then we have Sirius. Sirius, most people use Sirius for Most people use Sirius for the ability to give extra Cosmo and also attack and speed buff at the start of the battle, not for the ability of removing, triggering this, which removes Dispel Control effect. Still a very, very useful effect. It's just not the main reason why people are using Sirius. Therefore, you could argue, why would I level up Sirius for his constellation skill in a way which I would never actually play him, right? So that's kind of why I also have him at the lowest level, even though I do appreciate the fact that if you do actually have this available, this is actually a pretty strong skill by itself. It just that's not normally the way Sirius has actually been used in real life. So that's kind of why I don't want to rank it too highly. Then we have a bunch of other characters who I actually think, constellation skill is really useful, but the characters themselves are not being played that often. Ken Abel actually, no, it's a bit of an exception. Ken Abel's skill is actually really nice, but Ken Abel is too fragile that I don't think Ken Abel would actually be able to utilize his constellation skills. Basically, what Ken Abel is able to do is that when he fully transforms, so basically he needs to transform 3 times, and then afterwards, for maybe at least twice, then he would have the effect of all of the both forms. But the problem is he takes 6 seconds to transform. In order for him to transform twice, that basically means you need to be on the field for at least 12 seconds. Whether he can actually do that or not is quite difficult because he is fragile. But if you are able to pull it off, this is actually a pretty nice buff in terms of his ability. But that's kind of why I do appreciate the fact that he will get a massive power jump when you have his constellation skill max. It's just that whether you can actually pull it off in the first place to even trigger the condition, that's already quite difficult. And then in terms of the other characters, their constellation skill all give them a massive buff, but because the characters themselves are not actually being played much themselves, I don't really want to recommend them when there are so many other characters that you will be better off spending that resources on. But just bear in mind, if you do decide to play any of those characters on this 2 skills rank B tier, it will make them a lot better. It's just that whether you're actually even playing those characters in the first place. That's the reason why I'm ranking them there. Alright, now we move on to characters who will be better off with just 1 skills. Starting off, we have Hades Shun. Hades Shun can be played at a 5-star vanilla copy, so that's kind of why you can even get away with no constellation. However, if you do happen to have his constellation, you are actually able to protect your whole team a lot better. Because what happens is you reduce the trigger interval of Holy Heart by 1.5 seconds. This Holy Heart itself allow you to protect half of your team every single time when there's AoE attack. So it's a really good passive. And also naturally only have 4-second cooldown. So if you're able to further reduce it by 1.5 seconds, that's actually quite a huge amount of reduction. So it's actually worth it for that one skill. But once again, knowing that you can play him very budgetly without any investment, whether you actually want to level him up all the way to 11 star to even unlock Constellation, that's a decision you have to make yourself. Then we have Papillon Mule. Papillon Mule is absolutely important for you to have at least the first level of the skills, because when you have the first level of the skills, what happens is that you are going to be immune to damage for a whole 2.5 seconds every single time when you trigger Golden Dust. So basically every single time when you lose 15% of HP, you're going to be immune to damage for 2.5 seconds. That's basically what you need in order for Papillon Mule, to fully evolve. So that's very, very important why you need this Constellation skill. Now, do you need the second level? I will argue not, because the second level of Papillon Mule's Constellation skill is more about doing damage, so he uses looping skill a lot more frequently. However, Papillon Mule is mostly just used to stall out and make the battle longer. You are not expected to do the damage yourself. And also, if you are enough, basically the other thing he can do is that he will be able to dodge off the normal attack, etc. as well. But in all honesty, if you're able to survive long enough to fully evolve, normally you are not so weak enough that the normal attack do enough damage to you to cause harm anyway. But that's kind of why I argue the first level is going to be enough for Papillon Mule. Then we have Astroshun. Astroshun, the first level is going to be enough. First level is very important. Once again, in the Maze of Vision, in the Earth element, you kind of need that whenever you're facing up against teams with, let's say, a Gokos or Sagittarius Seiya. So you definitely want Astroshun's first level of ultimate skill. Ideally, if you have resources for the second level, that could also be good. But first level, a lot of times, is going to be sufficient for the Labyrinth mode, and that's where pretty much the only place you're going to play Astroshun anyway. So there's no need to go overkill on this. Then we have Sheena. Sheena is actually really good as a boss character. Basically, you need some kind of combination of clothes and constellation, but which way is kind of up to you. You can go for level 30 clothes and only the first level constellation, or you can go full constellation but only level 20 clothes, or try to build a budget with just one level constellation and level 20 of the clothes. However you want to mix them, it's all fine. But basically, the whole idea is that Sheena is not only able to do a huge amount of damage on bosses herself, but also that she's able to send the enemy onto electricity and for the rest of your team to do even more damage. So that's kind of why she is actually quite good to have at least the first level constellation. Then Marine. Marine is not going to be used much, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on here. But basically, it's all about RNG dodge. And on the first level, she is also able to heal, which basically makes her even more annoying to deal with. That's pretty much it for Marine. Queen. Queen is actually really good DPS, especially for bleed team, etc. He can be somewhat fragile, which is why you kind of want the first level of his ability. You want the first level of his ability so that he has extra damage reduction for each level of bleed. And normally when you play him, there will be a lot of bleed on the enemy. So this is actually really nice. Then the second one is that all of the damage of bleed will be doubled, and also he can gain extra max HP. I don't know, if you play him in a dedicated bleed team, I think it may be helpful. I have never actually seen a bleed team be executed, because pretty much the only character who is actually good and able to do bleed is just like Queen and Libra Shuru, and that's it. So none of them is a mainstream character. So I don't actually think there is like a proper bleed team right now, but potentially if there's a bleed team, it may be worth going after the second level of his constellation. But otherwise, I think right now, as of right now, first level is going to be enough. Same thing with Krishna. Krishna basically with his first level constellation skill, he's able to use something called Kudadini. Is it Kudadini? I think. Basically, he's opening protection, but he's able to use this once every 14 seconds, I want to say, in the battle. Yeah, every 14 seconds in battle. So that by itself is already quite nice. Basically, it's like just a massive shield every 14 seconds. If you have it on the second level, it reduces slightly to every 12 seconds. Whether 12 seconds matters compared to 14 seconds, no one really knows because a lot could have changed by then. So that's kind of why I think like the first level constellation is going to be enough for him. Then we have Mermaid Tetris. Once again, I think first level for Mermaid Tetris is going to be enough because basically what happens is you have this really long trigger cooldown of 6 seconds anyway. So even though at the first level it's just 50% chance, if you are actually linked up to an enemy who will be getting hit by normal attack, within those 6 seconds, normally the enemy will be hitting you like 3 or 4 times. So this would almost turn into like a guaranteed anyway. So that's kind of why I feel like maybe Mermaid Tetris the first level is going to be enough for her. So that's kind of why I put her here rather than, earlier on for the 2 skills. And obviously it's actually quite nice to have this because the whole idea of Mermaid Tetris is to make your character who's linked up to her even stronger. And if you have this ability, it does make that character a lot more stronger. Especially if this is an important team. If you're linking up to Aphrodite, it will make Aphrodite a lot stronger. So that's kind of the added advantage, and that's kind of why you do want at least one level of the skill. Then for the remaining character, if you just once again, I don't want to go through them because the video is already quite long. But if we just take a look at their skill description, you realize they all actually do something pretty nice. Like for example, Capella is able to break shield. Of course, Chemist is able to freeze enemy with normal attack. So they're all pretty nice effects. It's just that all of them are not actually being played that often, so there's no reason for you to really spend resources on them unless you're actually using them a lot. And out of all of the one, maybe a Quest Chemist is the only one you'll be using a lot, but you will be playing him in a freeze team anyway. And if you're playing him in a freeze team where the enemy tend to be frozen all the time, why do you need your normal attack to freeze them even more, right? Because the freeze doesn't actually stack. So that's kind of why I feel like it just doesn't really matter that much whether you have this constellation. But that's why I put them here. And then lastly, there's a bunch of characters who I just feel like you can't get away without a constellation skill at all. So it's just no need to go there. I'll probably just talk through the first 2 or maybe first 3 just so you get an idea why I don't think constellations needed. Desma, for example. The reason why I think Desma doesn't need constellation is because basically when he has his constellation skill, when anyone is first of all possessed by this, you burn extra cosmo. But a lot of time what you actually want is for Desma to kill someone or for the enemy to be dead so you can absorb their cosmo. So the fact that you're burning away enemy cosmo does not always turn out to be good for you. And then the second ability is when any enemy is possessed by the spirit of dead, get killed off, you reset off your cooldown and you revive your Cosmo to max. However, if you take a look at his clothes, he can already absorb 100% Cosmo from the enemies, so maybe he can normally a lot of time already make his Cosmo go to the max without his constellation. So this added ability just doesn't make sense. And yes, he can reset the cooldown, but you also have to realize if his Cosmo is already maxed out, then the skill he's gonna use straight away is gonna be his ultimate skill, and only after his ultimate skill finished, he would then be moved on to his other looping skill. So once again, does resetting this cooldown really help in real life? Because let's say if the cooldown is let's say only 5 seconds away from being used, and his ultimate takes like 2 or 3 seconds by itself, then you literally just save yourself only 1 second there. So it's just not really worth it from that perspective. And that's why I don't think my constellation is needed on Death Mars. And then we move on to Honda Stereo. Very, very good character, but once again, I don't think you really need his constellation. First of all, what it's able to do is you do better healing, but he's a healer already himself, so you probably a lot of time don't need that extra healing. Then on the second level, you're able to do more damage, but once again, he's a support character. He's not meant to be doing damage. And then he also dispel all buffs on target at every attack. But the problem is he already dispelled 1 buff per attack on the target right now. It's like how many layers of buff can different enemies have altogether that you actually need. Obviously, there's a bit of RNG. Your attacks may not always land on the same enemy. So there is a possibility you're not able to remove everything from the same person. But let's say even if you hit them, only twice or 3 times, you are already able to remove 3 buffs. So does it really make a difference that you're removing 2 or 3 buffs from the target, or you're removing all of the buff on target? Like, how many layers of buff does your enemy even have in the first place, right? But that's kind of why I don't feel like it's necessary to get the second level of his constellation. And then for Ophi, I think that's probably the last one I will talk about. Ophi basically have this one. Basically, uh, you would extend the duration of slumber by extra 2 seconds. But the problem is when the enemies are on the slumber and you use an ultimate attack, they will be awakening you up anyway. So once again, it's hard to quantify if you do actually spend resources into his constellation. How often would this actually help in real battle? And normally, you can probably see the trend. I generally prefer if I am going to put investment in constellation on character, I want to see the return. I don't want to get into a silly situation where I spend all of those resources to level some up and they can only be activated some of the time. It's just, to me, it doesn't feel very good to have that randomness factor. So that's kind of why I kind of sort it in a way where I can definitely see the return on investment on all of the character if I do choose to use their constellation skills, etc. And lastly, I just realized there are a bunch of characters who I didn't talk about. Those who are not in the game yet, so I'm not going to evaluate them. And then for the other three, Araya, Shaka, and also uh, Odysseus. I mean, those are only really available if you spend a lot of real life money. And if you're already spending all of that cash, very likely this whole tier list doesn't matter to you because you will have everyone already maxed out in terms of constellation. So it just makes no sense for me to talk about those cash play only characters in this video.